father, he arrived here in around about 11, 12 years old, lost his mother, age 15, huge trauma. My mother lost her eldest sister before coming here, but by God's grace, that my mother wasn't, for example, giving birth in a country like Pakistan, which I love, but has a maternal mortality rate of 150 per 100,000 births. There are still significant institutional barriers, structural, within our countries, within our governance, within our public policy, that are holding women back. You're not just the First Minister for the Muslim community, far from it. You're First Minister for the entire country. You immediately feel a weight, like a physical weight, upon your shoulders. And, you've got to carry that weight. And an interviewer said, maybe you're just too nice to have been First Minister. And I said to him, actually, if that is the worst criticism I can get from my opposition,
I'll take it.
I'm happy with that.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Born Into podcast. My name is Isra Chaker, and I'm the CEO of Every Pregnancy, and I am so glad you're here. As you know, each week on this podcast, we bring you episodes and stories of hope and resilience about what it's like to be a mom, support a mother, or support a system that supports good maternal health care for moms and babies around the world. We know that these systems are not just about what the community does and how they respond to moms and babies in their areas, but it's also about the governments and their response to building institutions and systemic ability to continue to support moms and babies throughout not just their pregnancy journey and childbirth, but even as they continue to thrive in society. And that's why today's conversation matters so much. Our guest today, live from London, England, is Humza Yousaf, former First Minister of Scotland. Before leading Scotland, he served in multiple cabinet roles, including as Health Secretary during the COVID pandemic, overseeing one of the most complex public systems any government has ever had to run. Humza had made history as the first Muslim to lead a Western European country when he became the First Minister of Scotland. But long before that moment, he was the son of immigrants raised in a Muslim household where faith, service, and justice were part of his everyday life. And today we are so excited to have him on board and to talk about the responsibility of governments to actually support moms and babies, and what does it take to build the systems that treat pregnancy and healthcare as a priority, not just an afterthought. Humza, welcome to Born Into.
Salam. What a great pleasure
to
be with you, to be talking to you, and to be part of the Every Pregnancy journey and the Born Into journey.
Yeah, I love that.
So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here.
As a Scotsman, I don't always travel to London, England. But this is such a great opportunity to be with you, talking to you, but also we're going to have a wonderful iftar, of course, later tonight as well. So you're so important that you've dragged a Scotsman down to England.
Can you believe that? I feel like that's a big deal.
A huge deal.
It's like between the British and the Scottish accent, I got to say Scots are kind of my favorite right now. And especially with how you all supported the different causes, especially moms and babies who suffer in different parts of the world, including in Gaza. Yeah. You've been such a vocal spokesperson for that, and I'm excited to talk to you about all of that. But before we jump into it, Humza, for those who are the first time kind of being introduced to you, honestly, from this audience, how would you introduce yourself?
Oh, first of all, I would say I'm Humza Yousaf, and I'm, before anything else, before former First Minister or former Health Secretary, I'm a father.
I love that.
I'm a husband. Nope. Yes, I am a husband. I'm Ramadan brain, and I'm a son. Amazing. And I've been shaped by incredible women in my life, which is why I'm also excited to do this podcast. So first and foremost, those are my identities, and you were right in your introduction. Faith is not a tick box or an add-on; it's a core part of who I am and my identity. And really, I'm somebody, I hope, who has been steeped in public service. And you and I are talking about 4 weeks from when I demit office and stand down from frontline politics. But I hope to continue that public service. So my life is dedicated to helping as many people as I possibly can and making the biggest impact to help the most vulnerable where I can. And I hope that God continues to give me the platform to be able to do so.
And I really think that you take this platform so seriously, you can feel it. It's like a responsibility to you. And even when I first met you in person, we were always connected online, but I met you first in person in DC a few months ago when you were doing a tour in support of the Muslim Public Affairs Council and the work that they're doing. And I remember someone saying, I love that he's so invested even in the Muslim American experience and people's call to action and civic engagement. And I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, what does a Scotsman care so much about how Muslims are and the support that we build and the systems we're building in different parts of the world, but especially in the United States, where we know, our circumstances as an American are extremely volatile, and the position we're in is very vulnerable. And oftentimes we oppose what our government's actions are, and we're very complicit in the genocide, and we want to change that. So why was it so important to you to even come to the U.S. and be part of that narrative and helping us build the confidence and the tools to change our own politics?
Yeah, for two reasons primarily.
Yeah.
And one is we are so internationalist and globalized as a community, as a people, as an entire species. Look, I can go back 2 generations. In fact, I could go back 1 generation. And my mother and father were not born in this country. They came here with their parents, my grandparents. My mother from Kenya, one of the Asians who was in East Africa, and my father and his family from Pakistan in the 1960s. Very typical story of South Asian migrants coming to this country and what they managed to build and what they managed to achieve. But they themselves actually were steeped in trauma. My father, he arrived here in around about 11, 12 years old, lost his mother, age 15, huge trauma. My mother,
So sorry.
No, thank you. My mother lost her eldest sister before coming here to the UK. So really steeped in trauma. And I try to remember the fact that it is but by God's grace, that my mother wasn't, for example, giving birth in a country like Pakistan, which I love, but has a maternal mortality rate of 150 per 100,000 births compared to the UK, which is still, by the way, too high, around about 12 per 100,000. So it's only by God's mercy, nothing else, not because I'm super talented or I've got wonderful skills or because of my endeavours. It's because of God's mercy. And so therefore I've got an absolute responsibility that sits quite heavily, I think, on my shoulders, and it should sit heavily on all of our shoulders for those that have some privilege, is to make sure that we are dedicating our life to make the world better for those that don't have the privilege that we do, Muslim or non-Muslim. So that's the first thing, internationalist outlook. So the US was important to go to. The second reason actually is, you're right, the times we're living in are deeply frightening, but also the opportunity is huge. But what I tried to say to my American friends, and I say it to my UK friends too, is that it doesn't really matter what political party you align with. It doesn't really matter what your political ideology is. If you believe in society's need to progress and not regress, then we are facing some forces in the United Kingdom and in the United States that want to take us back to the Dark Ages, that want to create a monolith, that want to create homogeneity. And the problem is transatlantic. So the far right in the United Kingdom are funded by the far right in the United States, by white supremacists in the United States. Tommy Robinson, who is the chief anti-Muslim propagandist here in the United Kingdom, his last court case was funded by Elon Musk. So
wow.
Yeah. So the
connection.
If the problem, and they share talking points and scripts. So if the problem is transatlantic, then surely the solution should be transatlantic.
Absolutely.
And so I'd say much like the wonderful work that you and your team, but you largely have led around, First for Mama and Every Pregnancy, is building coalitions. And we've got to build that coalition that says, no, we don't want society to regress. We believe in advancement. We believe in progress, and we believe in the basic human rights that every individual should have, regardless of race, religion, creed or background. So that's why the interest in not just the United States, but frankly, the entire world in terms of the direction that we're moving in.
I mean, so beautifully said and so powerfully said. I know that you talked about responsibility that you carry, but when you you were the first Muslim leader of a Western democracy. I mean, that is, mashallah, wow. In Europe, I can only imagine what that felt like for you personally. But what did it actually feel like stepping into that role beyond just the politics and beyond, the responsibility that you were going to do to actually be a good administrator to your constituents? Did it feel like anything else from the faith perspective that you were stepping into?
Yeah.
And how did you reconcile with that and navigate that?
Yeah. Look, and by the way, let's be really candid and open and honest with each other. I've been in politics 20 years, 4 years in the background, 15 years in the forefront. So actually 19 years. So just coming to almost 2 decades.
MashaAllah.
And yeah, all by the grace of God, you make plenty of mistakes on that journey.
Yeah.
And plenty of things that you reflect on. But those mistakes that you make are all part of the learning. And they're all part of creating the resilience that you need to be in a public-facing entity. Before we started recording, you and I were talking about the fact that the more high-profile you become, unfortunately, the more resilient you have to become to people who want to try to attack you. And so in terms of what did that feel like? Look, if I tell you the story, the result of the election contest to become First Minister, there was 3 candidates, myself and 2 others. And the result was being announced at 2 p.m. And this is March 2023. And we're in a room the size of this one that we're in. And the National Secretary of the party, who has the result in her hand, tells everybody else to clear the room, except the 3 of us. He said, look, you're just about to go on stage. And then result's going to be announced. But I'm going to tell you the result in private, 2 minutes before.
Oh my God.
She said, yeah, and this was always the way it was done. I'm not entirely sure the logic of it, but I think it's to be able to compose yourself if you're going to win. So we have I won't go into the detail of the voting system we have, but it's a bit intricate. Not just a plain first past the post because there's 3 candidates. And anyway, it becomes obvious that I'm elected as First Minister. And immediately I start crying.
Oh.
Because the weight of that responsibility is huge.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, of course, there's tears of joy because we've put in such work into the campaign. But there is real tears of, this is just a massive responsibility. And I'm not lying to you when I say, with all sincerity, that you immediately feel a weight, like a physical weight, upon your shoulders. And that responsibility is important because you're not just the First Minister for the Muslim community, far from it. You're First Minister for the entire country. And that means everybody and all their beautiful diversity that they exist. And, you've got to carry that weight. And I think for me, you never know if you're going to be in the role for 6 weeks, 6 years, or anywhere in between. And so what you try to keep in mind, particularly in politics, is whenever you leave, make sure that you have your integrity, your principles, you're intact. And make sure that whatever you're doing, this comes from our faith, that you're driven by your good intention, which was advice my father gave me. So look, I always try to do that. And I remember when I left office, and there was a week before between my resignation statement and then actually debating office, and an interviewer from the BBC, I think it was, came to interview me.
Yeah.
He said, one of your opponents says, you're a nice guy, and you've got strong principles, but maybe you're just too nice to have been First Minister. And I said to him, actually, if that is the worst criticism I can get from my opposition,
I'll take it.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. What a beautiful journey. And even to feel that physical weight, I feel like that's why you can probably relate to so much of what Zohran Mamdani is feeling, being the first Muslim mayor of New York City. Yeah. I mean, what a game changer for us. If anything, that was the hope and the glimmer of hope from 2025 for so many Muslims, not just in the U.S., but globally. I think when we talk about maternal health, it's often framed as just a healthcare issue. But I know that you really understand that it's an overall governance issue. So from your experience, what actually determines whether mothers and babies thrive in a society? And how do you build systems that support that? Yeah,
so people often confuse equality and equity. And I think that's a big problem. And so there's a mountain of studies, academic research, that will tell you, for example, just taking one example, of course, here, of the institutional barriers that women face, that every time they have a child, what that does in terms of their career progression versus a man who also might, by the way, be a father to children, but their career progression, women's career progression, will be 5 years behind their male counterpart, if not even more, some studies will show. And then multiply that by your second and your third and however many children you choose to have. So the truth of the matter is that there's undeniably, through all the academic research, all the lived experience that we have and we know of, all the qualitative, all the quantitative data tells us the same thing, that there are still significant institutional barriers, structural, within our countries, within our governance, within our public policy, that are holding women back from realising their full potential. And therefore, when you when you hold a woman back, the argument I think that holds true is you hold entire families back, entire communities back, and therefore entire countries back. And so in Scotland, we've tried to do a lot of work to try to dismantle some of those institutional barriers. So that involves a lot of early intervention. We're talking pre-birth.
Yeah.
So how do we support women with pregnancy grants, for those that are the most vulnerable? So again, they have access to, for example, certain classes, get access to certain vitamins that they might not otherwise have access to because they live in areas of high deprivation. Every single mother and family and child is eligible for, in Scotland, a baby box. This box comes and it's full of all the essentials. And by the way, it doesn't matter what you earn, you're entitled to that. And it comes with all of, not just the essentials, things that you just wouldn't even think that you need and require. The first time your baby has a fever and you're trying to look for a thermometer, and you don't have one, but the baby box has got all of that. And then trying to create the systems right throughout the mother's journey and the child's journey where we are systematically and deliberately dismantling the barriers that exist to their advancement, progression, and we're benefiting from that as a society. So it's very selfish in one sense, but I think with an altruistic underlying premise. So I think that's where, from a government perspective, and by the way, this work is, as you know, in the United States and the United Kingdom, just becoming more and more difficult. Because the forces that are reigning against us see this as all some kind of lefty, woke conspiracy. But actually, they are also often those men in advantageous positions to the detriment of their wives or their mothers or even their daughters. And I just wish that they would understand that they couldn't have got to where they got to. I mean, I know I couldn't have got to where I got to without my mother, without my sisters, without my wife, and so on. So, yeah, look, I think it's all about as early intervention as possible, and it's all about removing deliberately and systemically those institutional barriers that exist.
I love that. And I think that that's really critical because the maternal mortality rates globally are shockingly high.
Unbelievable.
And you know that Nigeria alone accounts for 30% of the maternal mortality crisis in rate. Just Nigeria alone.
It's incredible.
And that's why I was in Nigeria, because we as Every Pregnancy are prioritizing supporting local efforts and frontline efforts on the ground there and trying to really get to the root cause, but also address it because people are working on this issue. There are incredible frontline implementers like Professor Hadiza Galidanchi from ACEFAP, who is a trailblazer. And unfortunately, despite all the effort and attention of people on the ground, because of the greater systemic barriers of even the aid infrastructure or investments from philanthropic partners, they're still not seeing a fraction of what could be and what is needed to resolve the crisis. You know, on the economic empowerment and how the economy is actually feeding into this model too, for every $1 invested in women's health, it yields $9 in economic gains.
Wow.
Like that is proven research. That's a data set that I actually said on stage at Semaphore at the Billion Summit last year, and people were shocked to hear it, but that was the reality, and that is the reality. So we know when you invest in women's health, when you invest in maternal health, and give a mom and a woman all that she needs, like you said, so that she does have the access and the ability to continue with her career progression if she wants, and especially be able to support her family on her own 2 feet, that is the solution to so many ways. One thing you said, Humza, that stood out to me was you said grants, maternal grants. And I love that that's the framing you used because that is so antithesis to how people frame usually support to moms and babies. First of all, we're used to only hearing about it in the framework of like orphan support or widow support. Even our Muslim community, that's how we look at this issue. When we're supporting an orphan, we're supporting a widow, or we're supporting a mom, we're giving her life, we're saving her. But Every Pregnancy is really of the belief that we don't do that. That's not our mentality. And we hate that framing, actually. Like, I detest it. I detest everyone looking at moms as victims or as helpless. I never want someone to support this coalition out of pity. I want you to support because that is our obligation morally, but also these moms are not victims. They're not helpless. And so even when you're able to say, like, we invest in grant giving to them, that gives them even the positionality that we are here to invest in you, in your success and your growth. This is not a handout. This is not charity. And so I love that even that in itself, between as an equitable perspective, is such a beautiful perspective to have. But how do we get other governments, and in the U.S. or anywhere else, to prioritize it? Because if it was prioritized, we wouldn't have such high maternal mortality rates in general.
Yeah, and look, by the way, let me commend the work that you've done and for Mama and early pregnancy have done in such a short space of time.
Thank you.
Because I think the beauty of what you do is that there's so many good actors and players and partners doing fantastic work across the world.
Yes.
And yet, what sometimes is missing is that strategic alignment and that focus in one direction, and a credible pathway for donors, philanthropists, foundations to be able to fund and invest in. And yet, by the way, the literal name of that grant is called the Best Start Grant.
I love that.
In Scotland. So we want to give every child and every mother the best start they possibly can. So that's the name of the grant. So we're unequivocal about it. Look, the other thing I would say, and this is something I did as First Minister and wasn't terribly popular at the time with some, but I was unapologetic about it, is what I did was I raised the taxation level for those that are the wealthiest in order to fund some of this. And by the way, that included me at the time. I was in the highest tax bracket, and I said, well,
I love that you did that.
I'm happy to pay more.
We say the US tax the rich. We're all about it.
Yeah, but and again, you can imagine I got some criticism and some backlash, and even internally. And I said, look, it's the right thing to do. We have to do it. If we can't create money out of nothing, right? And of course, we should try to reduce inefficiency and increase productivity and so on. But I need some money right now, and there's some very wealthy people in this country who thankfully are paying taxation, and we're grateful for it, but they can afford to pay a little bit more. And let's get them to pay more, not to line my pockets, but to put into wonderful programs like the Best Start Grant, or we had something called the Scottish Child Payment, which helps, again, some of the poorest children in the country, lifts tens of thousands of children out of poverty in Scotland alone.
Wow.
And I think this is what we have to do with governments, and look, it's hard with the current administration that you have in the United States. I think what we're probably particularly bad at is really influencing future pipelines of leadership. So, that's not to say you should give up on the current administration. Continue the efforts that you have, build those coalitions, create as many credible voices advocating for the work of maternal health. People like Bill Gates, who often have an audience with the president. Begin to do what you can to support that work. But it would be foolish of us, and I would say negligent of us, and this is across the world, not just the United States and the United Kingdom and right across the world, to not look at the broader horizon and say, okay, we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket. But if we were to look at the next presidential elections in 2028, who are the likely candidates? And what are we doing to try to get them to understand the importance of maternal health? That it isn't just a nice to do or a tick box, but it is absolutely fundamental to a more equitable world. And by the way, also helps you with some of the issues that you have here. Why do we have such issues around mass migration to Europe, for example, and to the United States? Well, because people are fleeing poverty and conflict, and the fact that they may well be one of the 150 out of 100,000 that may well die on the operating theatre if they have to go in for a section during birth or giving a live birth. So I think a better future proofing and planning, I think, is really important, and investing some money in. That's not sexy, going to a donor and going to a philanthropist and saying, look, we need to put some money into lobbying various different candidates for president or governor or health secretary in the future. But we need that money to convince them, because they're going to be sitting around the cabinet table in 4 or 5 years' time, or maybe even in the White House, or maybe even at number 10.
Yeah.
And we need to do that work now, instead of leaving it, there's an election in 5 weeks' time, so we better start. No, I mean, you've left it far too late. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and when I demit office, I'm not standing again in the next Scottish elections in a few weeks' time. I'll be putting my efforts into, how do we more strategically align what we're seeking to do in this space, and making sure that we're not leaving it to chance and actually influencing policy in a positive way, not just for Muslims at all, but actually for the betterment of humanity in the future.
I love that. It's so beautifully said. And when you think about it, that's what real leadership actually is, right? But I feel like sometimes governments or people in office or people going to be potentially pursuing office don't really know how to focus on leadership that really is aligned with what the needs of their communities are, because the political cost of that sometimes is too high, given the opponents, given where lobbyist power is, where attention is being driven. And so how do you navigate that? And how did you navigate that when you were the first minister, where you were saying, okay, I have constituents, these are real issues we're navigating, but ultimately when the political cost is high to speak out against something, including the genocide, which you were very vocal about, like, you took that cost and you took the risk because I'm assuming it was like very personal connection to it, faith driven, and we'll talk about that. But how, from a political operative perspective, do you navigate that?
Well, look, again, I think we don't have the structures to help people to navigate it as a problem. So again, if we were to think about the pipeline of future congressmen and congresswomen, MPs in the country, there will always be certain lobby groups that will try to push them towards a certain direction. So in the United States, AIPAC probably one of the most obvious examples of where a lobby group very openly, it's not under the radar, very openly, very boastful. That this is what this is how much millions we put into X candidate, and this candidate was successful against Y candidate, right? So very, very open about it. And with all of the talent, wealth, expertise in campaigning that we have, but why have we not created structures that are able to say to people who want to advance, and again, this is not about Muslim causes, but I don't want anybody to get confused about what I'm saying. This is about simply progressive values, regardless of, by the way, what your political party is or what colours politically you wear. But if you want to see advancement and not regression, and saying, look, there's good people who sit in the Republicans and Democrats, good people who sit in Labour and the SNP and the Conservatives and the Greens and so on. Actually, how do we make sure that there is a body there that is able to help to make sure that they're not so dependent on, I think, more nefarious forces like AIPAC, who I think are really damaging political integrity in the United States. Well, it's not rocket science. We're clever people. We have very deep pockets as a community and a global community. Why are we not beginning to strategically align what we're doing and not leaving this stuff to chance and then complaining when somebody gets into office? And of course they're taking the AIPAC line because AIPAC gave them $3 million. Well, exactly. Stop complaining about it and do something about it. So we can, I think we need to begin to create the structures. And again, it was part of the conversation around transatlantic alliance with the US and the United Kingdom. If we can get it right in these two places, we can get it right just about anywhere. And I think it's about time that we began to be a lot more strategic and focused around what we're doing and not leave things to chance. Yeah,
100%. And part of that is breaking down the silos. When building Every Pregnancy, the biggest challenge I saw is that everyone is doing great work. All these organizations individually are supporting moms and babies on the ground in some of the hardest to reach areas. They're indigenous to these communities. They're not big, multilateral entities or big NGOs where a fraction of your dollar is going to where it needs to go or where you intended it to go as a donor. This is where people are committed to delivering the best quality service in the hardest to reach areas. But the problem is that they weren't working together. They weren't communicating. So one of my first goals and one of the core values of Every Pregnancy is that we don't work in silos. That this coordination, like you said, is not just strategic alignment, but it's also collaboration opportunities where you actually recognize that some of you work better when you are information sharing, when you are resource sharing. And a natural, beautiful output of Every Pregnancy has been, we've seen multiple partners now collaborating on joint programming for moms and babies, where one partner has portable ultrasounds in Gaza that others have not been able to get into the country and into Gaza. And then specifically, they'll share those resources and do the training for other partners on the ground. And so we are facilitating that. We're so proud of that outcome. And then, like I said, I think what you were saying is the idea is, how do you continue to break those silos, not just in the program intervention side of things, because that, of course, that's where the work is happening, impact is happening. But what decisions get that impact or get those dollars to there is where the silos also need to be broken down in our communities. 100%. I often feel, and let's just name it very directly, Humza, I feel like our community sometimes can be, and I'm talking about the Muslim community, and this is a challenge of ours, is that it's almost like a scarcity mentality, or we feel like if I'm doing something really well, I can't really share that model, or I can't, be so collaborative because then someone will just take my idea and run with it, and where does that leave me? And I feel the biggest problem sometimes is our egos that get in the way of impact. And so it's so funny because I literally will tell people, take the model, go take the Every Pregnancy model and use it wherever you want on nutritious infectious diseases, in politics and advocacy, because it works. But if we're all just so focused on building our own thing, how do we ever expect to be able to, compete honestly when it comes to impact that we really need? Like you said, you have institutions like AIPAC. They are the resource. And for the Muslim community, we have so many different PACs, so many different entities, so many different advocacy organizations. It's almost like, what do we do to push everyone together
Yeah.
and create this mega superpower that we have.
Well, look, I'm not. It's never my style to kind of blow smoke up the proverbial. But look, I think you're a demonstration of the fact that you need somebody that's credible to front some of these things. Because the truth of the matter is, particularly when we're talking about investments, money, and really significant amounts of money, then people, understandably so, funders want to understand that there's a credible person that's leading it, that maybe has experience. In your case, you had experience in campaigns. You were working with some of the biggest organisations in the world globally, including Oxfam and Amnesty and so on before. So you had a huge level of credibility. And again, by the grace of God, I would like to think that I've got some credibility in some circles. I'm sure there's some that my opponents will tell you otherwise. But generally speaking, the reason for that, again, it's all by God's mercy, not because of my endeavours, but because I started as an intern 20 years ago in politics. So I went from an intern to researcher to an advisor to elected to junior minister to senior minister to cabinet minister to first minister. So so people can look at that and say, look, well, he understood. If anybody understands politics, then he gets it, right? He's been there. He's been in the trenches. He's done the hard graft. He's delivered leaflets when the rain was soaking and he couldn't get a leaflet through the letterbox and it was crumbling in his hand, right the way through to sitting standing in Parliament, or sitting in Bute House, which is the First Minister's residence in Edinburgh. So, the credibility is really important, and we shouldn't be shy about that. That we need people who are credible to really spearhead some of these initiatives. I do know, and maybe feel free to challenge me on this. I do know a bit of a generational shift. I do know, and I think every pregnancy is a demonstration of this. Yeah. There are more and more people in our community willing to come together and collaborate. It's changing. One thing I used to notice, and I used to say to my dad, my father's an accountant, and he had a small practice. He actually just retired in November last year at the age of 73.
Wow.
And I say retired, he still works about 2-3 days a week, so semi-retired. And the street on which he's had his accountancy practice for the last 4 decades, when we were younger, opposite his office, there was at least 4 or 5 halal butcher shops right next door to each other.
Wow.
And he used to say to my dad, how the heck can these guys make any money? And so what would happen is one would open it, be successful, and the other guy would say, I'm going to take some of his profit. So I'm going to open, I'm talking literally the next unit down.
Oh my God.
And then a couple of units down would be the other 2. And so they would all be undercutting each other. There'd all be this price to bottom. And now if you go to that same street, there's 1 or 2 left maybe, and even they're struggling to go, and the others have come and gone. And it would have been, of course, and that's just a micro example of a bigger problem.
But it's true.
And I think what I'm seeing now, which I'm heartened about, is I do see from a generation now a much greater willingness to collaborate, to partner, to see the greater good. And that's not going to stop ego entirely, because we're human beings, and ultimately every single one of us, myself included, of course, you're included, everybody included, we all have a level of ego that we have to keep in check.
Absolutely.
We call it enough's ego, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's always going to be there. But I think there is understanding the pressure that we're under in the funding landscape and the political landscape. If we don't collaborate, then we die, and all of your endeavours really will become far more difficult, and everybody can win. It's the analogy of raising all the boats, together. If the water rises, all the boats rise together, and I think that's what we're able to do.
And to your point, that there's enough resources in the world for all of us.
Plenty.
And enough space and recognition. And at the end of the day, the impact should be what drives this more than anything.
Yeah.
And being able to see, even in 9 months, the Coalition Under Every Pregnancy to provide life-saving care to over 500,000 moms and babies in 9 months' time, delivered in over 20 countries. And that's just the beginning. We're barely scratching the surface. And so I'm so proud to say that Every Pregnancy really is that example. And I don't even give it to the leadership of the team behind it. I really give it to the coalition partners, because without them, we wouldn't exist, without them delivering the front lines, but without them also saying, this is something we want to engage in. Yeah. And we started to see the shift, even how nonprofit organizations are now prioritizing maternal health programming. So when I first started, so many of them were doing this programming, but they weren't talking about it or fundraising for it. Therefore, the capacity for it wasn't growing internally, and the prioritization for it wasn't growing internally. But when they felt like there was a structure and a system and a strategy that they could lean into, they naturally progressed to prioritize it. And I feel like that's exactly what we're seeing on the greater scale of how the Muslim community responds to this. Yeah. So, Humza, if you were advising governments today, what would you say is the single most important investment for mothers for each of them to do? Like, what would that be?
Wow. I mean, I suppose, not to give you the politicians kind of cop-out answer.
I kind of like the politician's corporate
but
answer.
Of course, every context will be different.
Of course.
But generally speaking, for me, a couple of things. Look, one of the big influences politically in my life was Malcolm X. I remember reading, for a lot of aspiring politicians, I think that's true.
Me too.
And, reading his biography was one of the kind of seminal works that I read growing up and becoming politically active. And of course, one of his very famous quotes is, you educate a man and you educate an individual, you educate a woman, actually, you educate an entire nation. I think that's really important for us to remember, that if we are not actually even elevating women, all we're doing is providing equity where there isn't any, and dismantling the barriers, then the entire country, nation, and therefore arguably the world absolutely benefits from that. But as early intervention as possible is required. Again, a plethora of academic research that you can drown in, that will tell you all of the same thing, that the earlier you can intervene, then the better chance you have in terms of tackling maternal mortality, but also for the outcomes for the child as well. And that's it. So as early intervention as possible, see it as an investment, absolutely as an investment. And you've talked about the figures in terms of the actual investment into maternal mortality and investing into women more generally. We've seen it from the work that we've done in Scotland in relation to getting more women into work. For every pound that we've spent, there's been an exceptional return in terms of getting women back into work, widening that pool of expertise and knowledge and different perspectives that we don't often have in corporate boards and so on. So as early an investment priority. And then, look, I think we should be doing much, much more to encourage young girls to think about getting into leadership spaces. And political leadership spaces. I have talked to too many women, including in the next Scottish elections in May this year, who are leaving politics because it's just too nasty, abusive and toxic a landscape. And we're losing such an enormous amount of talent. Yeah. Some of them much younger than I am, who could have had another 20 odd years plus in politics. Yeah. Leaving because they don't, and they shouldn't have to deal with the everyday misogyny, the abuse, the rape threats, all of that. God. Yeah, I mean, and it's the same, I'm sure, in the United States, if not worse, frankly. You guys quite literally carry guns, it's even worse, I think, for those in the United States. So we've got a real, look, early intervention, I think, is important. Seeing it as an investment is important. But then I think, again, a really organised, strategic, non-partisan effort to try, in your case, kind of bipartisan effort to make sure that there is more women in leadership spaces. And some wonderful people are doing good work in this, and Home Aberdeen, for example, is doing some really good work on that kind of women leadership space, and spoke very briefly to her a few months ago. So good people doing some wonderful work in this space, and I think we've got to step up, and government's got to step up to fund those initiatives and prioritise them, not as tick boxes, but seeing them as fundamental to their economic growth strategy. Absolutely. Fundamental to their strategies on education and health, and so on and so forth. Absolutely. So interesting, because I was having a conversation with your wife last night. She told me, she said, when are you going to get into politics? I said the exact same answer. I said, I'm too scared to. I used to always think, and people who've known me for over 10 years, since I was like a child, said I want to run for office one day. I want to be like a figure in the U.S., trying to make decisions, help the communities, only for the sake of giving back. And that has really worn down for me personally, truly. I believe in the power of collective action and in democracy. Honestly, I really do, on the value side and the ideology side. But I do think that the fear and the risk, especially as a woman, especially as a Muslim woman, especially as a visibly Muslim woman, it's sometimes it feels too great and not worth it. I'm I don't want to risk my safety. And so I really do hope that even the way that our politicians, but also the way that the political system is perceived even changes, because I feel like it used to be so hopeful. Yeah. And it's really hard to convince someone to believe that this is in your best interest to take on this role, even if you truly believe they have the expertise and the ability to lead. No, I couldn't agree more, but I'll give you a little counter in a minute to that.
Convince me otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want to hear.
I'll try to do a little bit of that. But also, look, first of all, got to acknowledge it, because it's true. And I don't sugarcoat it. And I get a lot of people of colour,
Exactly.
minorities, Muslims, Muslim women coming up to me asking me for advice, and I'm always happy to give it. But I do say you've got to go eyes wide open, because you've got to get the balance right. There is going to be toxicity. You will have to develop what we call a thick skin, but you don't want to develop such a thick skin that you're impervious to emotion or empathy, because actually being empathetic is probably the greatest gift and quality I think a politician could have, because we don't know all the answers, we don't understand every person's experience, but understanding with empathy what they're going through will motivate us to do better for those individuals. Absolutely. So empathy, but if you become so thick-skinned that you become impervious to any empathy whatsoever, then I don't think you should be in that position. So getting that balance right is always important. But look, I would say, look, everybody has got an incredible amount of skills, and we all know where our skills are, our strengths are, and often where our weaknesses are. And you may be playing in a really important role, as you have been doing over your working life, whether it was in those organisations we talked about before, but currently at the moment with the work that you're doing, that is Every Pregnancy is done with its coalition partners, that has gone stratospheric really, and is continuing to go through a wonderful trajectory. The counter I suppose I would give you is there aren't many people within the Muslim community in particular globally, I would say a fraction of a percent, that have had the exposure that you've had. You've sat down with prime ministers and presidents. You've sat down, with royalty. You've sat down, you've accessed the halls and corridors of power. Again, and you'll take this in the spirit it's intended, not through anything other than God's grace.
Absolutely.
And He's given you an incredible opportunity. The question is, are you going to waste it? Now, you're not wasting it. You're doing some fantastic and phenomenal work. But given you could be one of the select few people that could be in Congress, that could be in DC and representing your constituency, your district, with the skills that you have, with the knowledge that you have around campaigning, with your ability to communicate and articulate the way you do, with your access to philanthropy and funding, if you didn't go for Congress at some point, I would say that, if I would go as far as saying, if you didn't attempt to go for it, I would say that is such a waste of your abilities, opportunities, and maybe go as far as your big brother as saying that might even be negligent of you, actually. I think you have a great weight of responsibility on your shoulders to do some incredible things, which you're doing in the Every Pregnancy space. But there'll be a time, I think, where Every Pregnancy will be able to stand on its 2 feet without Isra.
Which is the goal.
And you'll train somebody to be able to do it. And at that point, if you didn't run for office, I'm personally going to come to the United States and give you a kick on the backside.
Yes. You'll be joining my brother, Congressman Andre Carson, and sister, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who all have said this to me so many times, and as literally as early as last week at their iftar.
But I'll be fourth in the queue behind them then.
You're going to be with them. Yeah. Listen, I'll never say never. No, and I feel like having a support system, like even the 4 of you and plus everyone around me, is honestly such, it provides security and support in a way that I think that we all need truly to be able to take on these roles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hamza, do you ever miss being in office?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Would you go back?
Look, again, I would never say never. Certainly not in the immediate future. Yeah. Because look, there's lots of things that have come at the right time for me. So you've done the top job. Yeah. You step back from office. It's time to move on. Turned 40 last year. Even Islamically, 40 is quite an important age. We know from the prophetic tradition. And everything, even with my children and where they are in their schooling journey, everything is just the right time.
Yeah.
And going back to women, my wife, who you met yesterday, has sacrificed so much for me over these last few years. It's really time that I do a bit of the sacrificing and say to her, look, what do you want to do and what do we want to do together? So Charlotte, one of the things we'll do, for example, is my next kind of chapter will involve doing various different projects that hopefully will keep my financial foundation solid, and anything on top of that, speaking, books, we'll put into a charitable foundation in our names collectively with me and Nadia, and we'll support some really good projects, hopefully, inshallah, including wonderful maternal health projects, including Every Pregnancy. But that's the, she sacrificed a lot of time for me to do a bit of sacrificing, for sure. But I think ultimately my role, I'm 40, so I'm not quite in the kind of elder statesman role just yet. But I do think there's a lot of us that have had so much political experience,
so true,
over years and decades, And again, one of the things I'll be working on is how do we create that support structure for aspiring politicians and the next generation, nurturing the next generation of global leadership, particularly within Muslims living in the West. And again, totally bipartisan, across the political spectrum. It's not about what party you belong to. How do we make sure that you're not just values driven, that you have the access to good people that have done this before, that have made mistakes along the way, have the battle scars that can teach you about communication and political strategy or whatever it is. And create that support network across the world where we support each other. I've always been of the impression that when you get to any senior position, you don't pull the ladder up. You give your hand down and you pull other people up with you, right? Yes. And so that's got to be the goal with what I do. So when you are ready to run for office and you need a campaign manager and you need advice or anything like that, then I'll be one of your many network, inshallah, that you'll have.
But the best of the best right here. And this is on camera, it's recorded. This is amazing. I'll be like, oh my gosh, I got to do this. I got to do it. But I appreciate that so much. Hamza, for my last question for you, before I ask you a couple sentences just to finish the sentence, for those that are listening and thinking to themselves, like, you're an inspiration to them and what you've been able to do feels like very far-fetched for them. Like that's impossible, in the realm of impossibility for them. What would you advise them as now, not just in the maternal health space, but just as a big brother to them? How would you get people who are really feeling weighed down with the state of the world today, but want to do something about it, but maybe scared, maybe anxious, maybe don't know where to start? What would be your like brotherly advice to anybody, no matter what sector they're working in, no matter where, how old they are, no matter what identities they carry? What's your advice to them right now?
So look, all of us have power and all of us have a platform, maybe within your own family. Maybe that you're a family of 4 or 5 and you're able to influence that, and that's your platform.
I love that.
It may be that you're the leader of a country and therefore you're able to, and everyone in between.
Yeah.
The CEO of a company, a middle manager, whatever your platform is in life, you've got a platform. And so if you believe, again, I keep going back to this point about the advancement of society, that we want to keep moving forward, that we take real value in being multiracial, multicultural. That's a strength, not a weakness. If you believe in those values, then absolutely begin to use whatever platform that you have to advocate. And I think the second thing I would say is that, look, everybody has the ability to make change, and we've seen that. This was advice given to me and kind of faith inspired, as long as the intention is good, then opportunity will open for you.
Yes.
I remember when I was growing up as a South Asian young boy, and my parents, they wanted me to either be a doctor, dentist, lawyer, accountant, or pharmacist, right?
Same here.
And because I was relatively okay at English and not so good maybe at the sciences, they said, well, you'll be a lawyer. And in our system, in the UK system, you have kind of 5 choices for your university that you want to apply for. And 4 of them were law, different higher education institutes in Scotland and the UK. And 1, I snuck in politics at the bottom. And I got into both. I got into 2 courses in law and I got into 1 in politics. So I had to make a decision, 1 in politics. So I had to make a decision. And I remember it was the scariest conversation I had with my parents at that point. I was 17, sorry. And the paper was shaking in my hand, I was going to speak to mum and dad, say, I don't want to do law, I want to do politics. And I was really frightened because I thought they were going to bite my head off.
Yeah.
And alhamdulillah, they were great.
Wow.
Dad in particular was saying, look, we need people, like our own people. We're under this is post 9/11, this is, we're in a really difficult space. We need our people to come forward and represent unapologetically who we are and what we stand for. Again, not for the betterment of our own community, but believe for humanity and the greater good. My mother was absolutely supportive, but maybe a little bit more worried. And what she would say to me is, what kind of job are you going to get if you study politics?
That was my mom and dad.
And then I'm like, wait, I did okay. But the point is, I suppose saying that is, my father's retort to that was, look, if you're really passionate about something, then doors will open for him.
Absolutely.
And so I suppose that's my long way of saying, look, that very advice that my father gave to me, that if you're really passionate, and it can be anything, you're passionate about hair and beauty, right? So one of your partners is Huda Beauty, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, we love Huda, we love Mona, we love the work they do. And look, they've not just created a beauty brand. Somebody who, doesn't know much about cosmetics and makeup, the brand is so much more than that. It's
Absolutely.
social. It's about, again, investment in raising women up in particular. They're great examples of that themselves. So whatever your passion is, you can use it for the greater good. And that's all I would suggest that you do, is you put your efforts and your energy into what you're passionate about.
I love that. Such good advice, and advice that I'm going to take after this conversation and move forward with to continue to build my personal and professional career.
And let me start before you go into kind of quick fire questions, let me turn it around. What's your advice to me? So you're somebody who has done so much, and
no one's ever asked me a question on the podcast.
I've got to turn it around because I always get interviewed. What's your advice to people about how they can maximize their impact? And you don't need to think about me, but just more generally, helping people, because I'm at a transition point.
Yeah,
a really interesting one. I'm looking forward to, a little bit nervous about, but excited about the opportunity. So So how can somebody, whether they're at a transition point or they're at entry into the next chapter, whether it's schooling or training or education or employment, what's your advice to maximize their impact?
That's such a good question, and I really can't believe the script has been flipped on me here. But it's funny because I've always told people my life has never been linear. Nothing I've done actually makes sense on paper in terms of the trajectory I went down. Studied architecture for college, did my master's in international affairs and public policy. Started off in like the NGO world, dipped down to specifically changed into a very specific organization working on Syria. Didn't know what advocacy or activism was. Called myself a social architect because I didn't know what else to say, just connecting people to causes. And then being an activist on the streets, protesting for the White House, literally for years and years. And then now leading a maternal newborn health organization. No one would believe that story. But all I will say is I've never doubted the power of my voice. I've truly believed that my voice can move mountains. Like I have full conviction in my ability, my brain, my strength, my fortitude, and my faith. And for me, that's all. And I also am someone who's very much a yes woman to myself. Meaning if I feel passionate about something an idea has sparked, I'm going to do everything I can to make that a reality. Especially after getting like shura or advice from people around me. And if they are like, this is good, and they're going to check my ego for me, and I'm going to constantly have those checks and balances in, then I feel really good about it.
Fantastic.
But many people have told me, like, you'll never be something. Like, honestly, many people have said, what do you think you're going to do in D.C. as a Muslim woman, visibly Muslim? You think you're ever going to be in a position of influence?
Wow.
And I took all those comments and said, you know what, maybe I won't ever be. But as long as I am true to myself and feel like I'm doing what I feel like God's given me, the responsibility and the platform to do something with my voice, then I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it proudly and unapologetically, to your point. And so I think it's easier to shy away from even your own creativity and your own passions and your own full conviction because you're scared of the world disappointing you or failing or making mistakes. And like you said, we all have made so many mistakes. But if there's anything I've learned is that my voice will get me through. And if it doesn't work out the way that I envision, that's okay. Just pick it up and do it something else. But to just lead where those ideas take me. And so that's what even brought me here. It's what brought me to meet you. I mean, this whole thing is, and God continues to show it to me with every interaction, every conversation, like, oh, I'm on the right path here. And it feels good, alhamdulillah. And at the end of the day, I just remember, like, we're all not going to be here. And so what are we leaving behind when we leave this world, we leave this dunya? And then what are we looking forward to tell God when we meet him? Like, that's something very important to me. I want to be in a position where I'm like, I'm very honored of what I did in the world. It's not easy, but it's worth it.
That's wonderful. And I think, honestly, very inspiring. And I'll give you the script back in a second. But I think it's important because a lot of people who are often minorities, and actually women who are in the majority, who often suffer from, I suppose, what we call imposter syndrome, right?
Absolutely. And so much of it.
My wonderful brother-in-law, Yasser Ahmed, and you can check out his content online. He's very good.
He's a mega influencer. Mega influencer.
He talks about imposter syndrome and actually challenges the concept. But what I'd say about it is, I remember the first time I was invited to a committee meeting at the House of Lords.
Yeah.
And I was bricking it. I mean, I was really nervous. I was 29, I think.
Oh my God.
I'm not even 30 yet. And here I was going to be grilled by this committee of lords.
Yeah, House of Lords just sounds so Game of Thrones sounding.
Yeah. So here I was, I'd only been elected for a few years and they were about to give me a real grilling. And I remember speaking to one of my seniors, who'd been in politics much longer than me.
Yeah.
And he just kept saying to me, by the way, they're just human beings. They might have a fancy title in front of their name, but trust me, this brief better than they do. You know, inside out, they might pick up the papers in the morning. You've been doing this work for a few years. And never doubt that your own ability and your own capacity. And I went there, and alhamdulillah, again, by the grace of God, you know, it all went well. You know, I put a few of them in their place, and you know, and people were then talking, oh, this guy, you know, he's actually knows his stuff. Surprise, surprise. So, alhamdulillah, again, I think it's right. Just believe in your own voice, right, and believe in your ability and capacity. So, wonderful advice. Thank you.
No, thank you. And that was amazing. So some spitfire, just finish the sentence. Every mother deserves.
Every mother deserves the best start.
Every child should have.
Oh, I should have said best start there, huh?
Yeah, I guess you could say the same thing.
Yeah, no, every child deserves, every child deserves equal opportunity.
A beautiful future for community is?
Together.
Beautiful. Those are my 3 spitfire questions. You did a beautiful job. You killed it, Humza.
Thank you.
You know, this was such a beautiful conversation, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because it left me feeling inspired, invigorated, and actually now contemplating my future career in politics, everybody. I'm going to put it here for the record. If I do ever venture, if I ever venture in, and he's on my advisory board in my campaign, but also one of the people that inspired me to do so. And so thank you, Humza, for joining us today on Born Into, and thank you for talking about how, from someone who was inside the systemic institutions that can create policy and resources that support moms and babies no matter what, not just with their start, but also throughout their lives. But you also are now someone who's advising on the outside and building community power to continue to influence those infrastructure and those systems. We just want to thank you for inspiring people here who are listening around the world that your voice still matters, that you are a valued member of your government, of your constituency, but also that you can make a difference in this world, and that we need to feel that responsibility individually and collectively and do something about it. So what a brilliant conversation, and talk about equity, equality, and all the different ways that we can build that inside these institutions, but also create our own institutions that challenge that and create those spaces that we really want, being a social architect in the different ways that we are. We're so excited. And if you want to support Humza Yousaf's work, please follow him on social media. We'll have his handle in the episode notes for this episode on the podcast. Share this episode, share it with your friends, and continue to use your voice in the best way possible. Be passionate, be fearless, and be unapologetic about who you are. And continue to support and follow the work of Every Pregnancy at everypregnancy.org. Thank you from London, England, you know, for the Scotsman that came all the way here for this conversation. Thank you, Humza, and thank you for tuning into Born Into.
Shukran jazeelan. I look forward to hosting you in Edinburgh.
Oh, I can't wait. Edinburgh, it's like my favorite. I used to watch that Viking show.